Mom's retired, he said. She's a little out of touch with current discussions. You understand. The woman looked at him, then at me, then back at him. I'm sorry, who are you? My name is Dorothy Hayes, 67 years old, the English Literature Department Christmas party. The woman asking is Barbara Finch, my former colleague, 30 years at this university. The man she's asking is my son Christopher. He has been living in my house for 8 months, and he has just explained to a room full of my colleagues that I am out of touch. If you want to know how this ended, stay with me. And if you haven't already, please subscribe and hit the bell. I tell stories every week. Christopher, her son, financial analyst. Barbara looked at him for one more moment. I see, she said, and turned back to me as if he had simply ceased to exist. That evening, I understood 2 things. First, this was not the first time. Second, it would not happen again. But let me start from the beginning. Tuesday, 4:30. Margaret had just played the ace of clubs and finished her story about a former client, a man who hid money from his wife in a fish tank with live eels. We laughed. Florence laughed so hard she dropped her cards. Paula laughed quietly, but for a long time. She always laughs longer than everyone else, as if she processes things on a delay. I told the Nabokov story. I've been telling it for 20 years, a little differently each time, about how he answered a critic who called his prose mannered. 1 sentence, that's all he needed. I love that story for its precision. Nabokov could put everything necessary into a single sentence. My friends have heard it 6 times. They listen as if it's the first. That's the mark of real friendship. Christopher walked out of the kitchen. He was getting coffee. I'd heard the machine running. Mug in hand, one earbud in, the other dangling from the cord across his shoulder. He always moves through the house that way. Half here, half somewhere else. Mom, he said, you've got that wrong again. Nabokov never said that. It's apocryphal. I checked. Margaret looked at me. Florence looked at me. Paula looked at her cards. I smiled. Perhaps, Chris. He nodded, satisfied, not unkind, and went back to the kitchen. From behind the sofa came Sarah's voice. She was asking him something about dinner. I wasn't listening. I laid out my cards. Margaret kept her eyes on me. Dorothy, she said. Margaret, I said. How many times? 4, I said. I've been counting since September. Margaret put her cards face down on the table. I see. Florence raised her eyebrows. Paula took out her notebook. She always carries one, a habit from the laboratory years. Shall I write it down? Not yet, I said. I looked at the green baize and thought. Not about Nabokov. About the fact that Christopher has lived with me for 8 months. About the fact that this was the 4th time. About the fact that each time, in front of people. About the fact that Sarah, from behind the sofa, had smiled. I'd seen it from the corner of my eye. Not unkindly, no, just smiled. A quiet agreement. A small betrayal every time. I thought about something a colleague of mine, a philosopher, long retired, once said at a conference. He said, the most reliable way to understand someone's view of you is not to listen to what they say about you, but to watch how they behave when you are present and they believe you are not fully attending. Christopher believed I was not fully attending. That was the thing. He'd corrected me 4 times, and each time he'd done it with the ease of a man who expected no resistance. Not malice, ease. The ease of someone who has settled, without ever consciously deciding to, into a particular idea of who I was. An idea that had a lot to do with age and retirement and widowhood, and very little to do with the person who had been in the room all along. 32 years I spent teaching other people how to read, think, and speak. I picked up my cards. Whose turn? But let me tell you from the beginning, because the fourth time isn't where this story starts. It starts 8 months ago, in March, when Christopher called and said, "Mom, we have a small situation. My name is Dorothy Hayes. I'm 67 years old. For 32 years, I taught English literature at the university. For the last 3 years, I've been a widow. I live alone in the house I bought myself in 1989 when Christopher was 9 months old and hadn't yet learned to speak. That detail matters, that he couldn't speak then. Now he speaks far too readily. Tom died on a Tuesday, as it happens. I've thought about that sometimes, the symmetry. He would have found it funny. He had a gift for finding the structural elegance in things that weren't trying to be elegant. He'd taught mathematics for 20 years before moving into administration, and he never quite stopped seeing patterns. The world, he said, keeps arranging itself whether you ask it to or not. He was 58. We thought we had a great deal of time left. Every Tuesday at 3:30, my friends come over. Margaret Collins, 69, former family law attorney, 30 years in the courts, a tongue like a scalpel. Florence Webb, 68, former school principal, capable of a silence so uncomfortable it makes people confess. Paula Sherman, 71, retired chemist, always has a notebook and always has a pen and writes down things you've already forgotten you said. We play bridge. We drink tea. Sometimes something stronger. It's the best part of my week. When Christopher said small situation in March, I didn't yet know it meant the end of Tuesdays as I'd known them. The small situation looked like this. He and Sarah had sold their apartment. Good price, right market moment. Christopher understands these things better than I do. He said so. They hadn't managed to buy a new one. The market, the timing, something else. They needed 3 months, maybe 4. Mom, you have 3 bedrooms. I have 3 bedrooms. There was also a 4th, my study, where my books are, and that armchair, but that's a separate story. I said, "Of course, come stay." That was March. It's now November. Sarah is a good person. I want to say that now because it matters later. She isn't cruel. She helps with groceries, cooks on Tuesdays, asks how I'm feeling. She loves Christopher. You can see it. She simply trusts him in everything. If Christopher said it, then that's how it is. If Christopher corrected someone, then he was right. That's the problem. The first week was fine, almost fine. Christopher unpacked boxes in the guest room. Sarah arranged her bottles in the bathroom. There turned out to be many of them. I had to clear a shelf. I cleared it. We had dinner together, talked. On the 7th day, Christopher arrived with a sofa. Not a question, a sofa. Light gray, Scandinavian style, on 4 wooden legs. 2 men carried it into the living room. "Chris," I said, "we have a sofa." "Mom, that sofa is 20 years old. It can't be comfortable." "It's comfortable to me." "Sarah found this one. Look at it. Completely different quality." I looked at the new sofa, then at the old one. The old one was dark green, worn on the armrests, perfect. Tom and I bought it in '94 when we redid the living room. Christopher used to do his homework on it, used to pretend to do his homework on it. I used to mark papers on it on Sunday evenings, legs tucked up, red pen in hand, the television on low. 300 papers a year for 32 years. That sofa has absorbed more English literature than most bookshelves. "And mine?" I asked. "We'll donate it." I said nothing. Sometimes I choose to say nothing. Not because there's nothing to say, but because I haven't yet decided exactly what. The sofa was installed. The old one was taken away. I watched it go through the front door and felt something I couldn't quite name. Not grief, it was a sofa. Something smaller than grief and less dramatic, but persistent. In the place where my armchair had stood, from my study, which had also disappeared that same day, they put a scratching post, round, beige, with a rope column. "For a cat?" I asked. "We're thinking of getting one," said Christopher. "Sarah likes cats." We never had a cat. We had a dog, Rusty, a fox terrier, died 5 years ago. Tom was very upset. He cried in the garden and then pretended he hadn't been crying when he came back inside, which I thought was exactly right. Grief is private, even from the people who share it. I looked at the scratching post in the middle of my living room. "Fine," I said. I thought about it later that evening, sitting in the new sofa that didn't feel like mine. I'd been sitting in the same chair, my chair, in my study, for the better part of 30 years. That's where I read. That's where I thought. That's where I planned 47 courses, supervised 12 doctoral students, wrote 3 books, and made approximately 10,000 cups of tea. The scratching post stood where my chair used to be. There was no cat. The first time he corrected me was in September. The neighbors, Bill and Carol Watkins, came for dinner. We've known each other for about 25 years. Carol worked with me in the same department, then moved to a private school. Bill is an architect. Good people. A pleasant evening. I was telling the story of our neighborhood, how it was in the 80s, small shops, a different rhythm, completely different prices. I said the house cost $112,000 in '89. "Mom," Christopher said, "the number was different. Dad said 118. Bill looked at his plate. Carol reached for bread. "Tom quoted different figures at different times," I said. "It depended on his mood." "Still," Christopher smiled, 118 is more accurate. "The purchase agreement is in the 3rd drawer of my desk. $112,300. I signed it myself. Tom was in Chicago on business at the time." I didn't say that aloud. I poured the wine. The second time was October. Florence had stopped by briefly to pick up a book. We were standing in the hallway. I was telling her what I was reading. Christopher was walking past with his laptop. "Mom, you're oversimplifying," he said without stopping. "That book is actually about something else." Florence looked at him, then at me. "Has he read it?" she asked when he'd gone. "I don't think so," I said. Florence nodded, took her book. At the door, she turned back. "Dorothy, are you all right?" "Perfectly," I said. That was true, at the time. The third time was at Nancy Harris's birthday party. Nancy lives across the street, gathers everyone once a year, about 30 people. I took Christopher. He was home anyway. Alberto Manzoni was there, Nancy's colleague, Italian, a conductor. We were talking about music. I pronounced the name of an Italian composer, Respighi. "Mom," Christopher said beside me, "it's pronounced differently. Respighi, stress on the first syllable." Alberto Manzoni slowly set down his glass. "Signora Hayes is pronouncing it correctly," he said. Christopher smiled. "I must have heard it differently." "From whom?" asked Alberto. "Chris," I said, "would you get me some water, please?" He went for water. Alberto looked after him with the expression one wears when a child has broken an expensive vase. "Your son," he said. "Yes," I said. "He often helps?" "Regularly," I said. Alberto picked up his glass again. "Coraggio," he said. That means courage. "Thank you, Alberto." The fourth time was last Tuesday, the one with Nabokov, which I've already told you. The coffee mug, the smile. That's apocryphal, I checked. After Christopher left, Margaret stared at the kitchen door for a long moment, then said, "Tell me, does he actually know who his mother is?" I picked up my cards. "What do you mean?" Does he know you spent 32 years lecturing on that same Nabokov? He knows, I said. He just doesn't think about it. Margaret said something under her breath. I didn't ask her to repeat it. The tone was clear enough. Florence carefully played a card. What are you going to do? I looked at the green baize, at the scratching post in the corner, at the spot where my armchair used to stand. Nothing in particular, I said. Just, next Tuesday, be prepared. Margaret smiled slowly, the smile she must have saved for special moments in the courtroom. Shall I write it down? Asked Paula, opening her notebook. Now, yes, I said. Let me tell you about November, because November was heavy. Not dramatically, no scenes, no tears. Heavy in the way it's heavy when someone in your house keeps quietly moving things, and each time you notice something is in the wrong place. It started small, the way these things always do. One morning I came downstairs and found my mother's china in a different cabinet. The blue and white set she brought from England in 1963, the one I've kept on the second shelf of the sideboard for 40 years. Now it was on the top shelf, pushed back, behind Sarah's large pasta bowls. I needed the space, Sarah said when I mentioned it. I didn't think you used those. I use them at Christmas, I said. Oh, I can move them back. No, it's fine, I said. It wasn't fine. But it was China, not the moon. Then one afternoon I went to my study for a book. I wanted to reread a particular chapter in a Forster biography and found Christopher sitting at my desk with 3 monitors set up. He'd rearranged everything to fit them. My papers were in a neat stack on the small side table. My reading lamp had been moved to the window ledge. Hope you don't mind, he said, not looking up. The light's better in here for video calls. When did this happen? I asked. Tuesday, I think. Or Wednesday. He finally looked up. Do you need to be in here? I can give you 20 minutes. I looked at my desk, at the 3 monitors, at my reading lamp on the window ledge. No, I said. I'll manage. I went to the living room, sat in the new sofa, which still didn't feel like mine, and read my chapter there. It's a very good Forster biography. I had difficulty concentrating. What I found myself thinking about instead was something Margaret said years ago during a particularly unpleasant divorce case she was handling. She said, "The most insidious kind of taking is the kind that arrives dressed as convenience." I thought about that for a long time. The week after, there was the dinner party at the Hendersons, our street 4 houses down, a gathering of about 15 neighbors. I've been going to these dinners for 30 years. At some point, Richard Henderson asked me about a documentary on the BBC, something about post-war British literature, and whether I thought it was accurate. I started to answer. Christopher, from across the table, said, "Actually, there was a fairly good article in The Spectator that challenged the main thesis." The documentary oversimplified quite a bit. Richard looked at Christopher, then at me. Has he seen the documentary? Richard asked me, not unkindly. I don't know, I said. Christopher, who apparently had been watching this exchange, I haven't seen it, no, but I read the Spectator piece. The argument stands without it. There was a silence of the particular kind that happens when something slightly wrong has been said in a room full of polite people. Dorothy, said Richard, with the manner of a man firmly redirecting. What did you make of the second episode? I thought the section on Larkin was genuinely moving. I told him what I thought of the section on Larkin. It was a good conversation. Christopher did not interrupt again, but I noticed, on the way home, that he walked with the slight forward lean of someone who doesn't yet understand what they've just done. I thought, he genuinely doesn't know. That's the strangest part. He genuinely thinks he was contributing. I thought about all the students I'd had over 32 years who were like this. Not cruel, not stupid, just convinced, with a confidence that had never been properly tested, that what they had to say was the most useful thing in any room. Some of them grew out of it. Some didn't. I wondered which kind Christopher was. The university party, annual, the English literature department, I'm invited every year, even though I've been retired for 3. They remember me there. They remember my seminars, my papers, my course on narrative structure that ran for 15 years and that students called simply Hayes. I took Christopher. I like it when children see what their parents did. Tom always came to my lectures. He'd sit in the back row, listening as if he were hearing it for the first time. The party was in the faculty common room. Good lighting, too much wine, the particular atmosphere of people who spend their working lives with books and therefore have very strong opinions about everything. I love these people. I've missed them. Barbara Finch, my former colleague, an Austen specialist, hugged me at the entrance. "Dorothy, you look wonderful. Chris, lovely to meet you. Your mother is a legend of this department. Dorothy, they've all read your last paper on Mansfield Park. They'd love to discuss it. Do you mind?" Christopher was standing next to me. "Mom's retired," he said. "She's a little out of touch with current discussions. You understand." Barbara looked at him, then at me, then back at him, slowly, the way one looks at something unexpected. "I'm sorry, who are you?" "Christopher, her son, financial analyst." "I see," said Barbara. The silence that followed was long and very full. Her expression didn't change. That was the remarkable thing about Barbara. 30 years of dealing with undergraduates who hadn't done the reading had given her a face of complete, serene neutrality in the face of almost anything. "Dorothy," she said at last, turning to me as if Christopher had simply ceased to be a factor, "your last paper was circulated at the faculty conference in Edinburgh. Alan Pierce quoted it in his keynote. Did you know that?" "I didn't," I said. "He did, 3 times. She took my arm. "Come on, he came especially. He wants to talk about your approach to primary texts." Christopher was left standing at the entrance with a glass in his hand. I didn't look back, but I thought about him the whole way across the room. Thought about how he stood there alone, surrounded by people who all knew who I was, having no idea what he'd just done. I talked to Alan Pierce for 40 minutes, then to 3 former students who are now junior lecturers and who told me things about my old course that were unexpectedly moving. Then to a woman from the history department who had read my Nabokov paper and wanted to discuss translation theory. It was the best evening I'd had in months. Christopher found me near the end, just before we left. He was slightly quiet in the taxi home. Looked out the window. "Your colleagues are intense," he said finally. "They're passionate about their work," I said. "Is it always like that?" "Like what?" He thought for a moment. "Like everyone knows exactly what everyone else has done. All their papers, their lectures, their history." "We've known each other for a long time," I said. "And in that world, what you've written is who you are." He nodded slowly, said nothing more. I thought about that on the way home, and I thought that he would do it again next Tuesday, unless I did something first. I called Margaret on Monday evening, 8 o'clock. Christopher and Sarah were watching something in the guest room. I could hear the muffled sound of a series. I sat in the kitchen with a cup of tea and my phone. "Margaret," I said when she picked up. "Dorothy," she said, "tomorrow is Tuesday." "Tomorrow is Tuesday," I confirmed. "Listen, I have an idea about Christopher." A pause. I heard her put something down. "Tell me." I told her. Margaret listened without interrupting. That's professional in her. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. "So just questions," she said. "Just questions," I confirmed. Politely, with genuine interest. "Dorothy." "Yes?" "He comes out to the kitchen himself?" "As usual, 4:30 for coffee." "Good," said Margaret. "I'll call Florence. Will Paula bring her notebook? Paula always brings her notebook. Perfect, said Margaret. Until tomorrow, then. She hung up. I sat in the kitchen a while longer. Through the wall came laughter. Sarah was laughing at something in the series. A genuine laugh from the heart. I finished my tea, went to my room, took from the third drawer of my desk a stack of index cards, small, white, the kind I used to write lecture notes on, picked up a pen, thought, wrote a few things down, put the cards in my cardigan pocket. In the morning, I baked biscuits, ginger with cinnamon, the ones my friends like. Christopher came downstairs for breakfast, saw the tray, raised an eyebrow. On account of Tuesday? On account of Tuesday, I said. Sarah took one. Dorothy, you bake wonderfully. Thank you, dear. Christopher sat down with his coffee, opened his laptop, one earbud in, the other dangling, as always. What time are the girls today? He asked, without looking up. 3:30, as usual. Right. I'll be in the study. I won't be in the way. I looked at him, at the laptop, at the earbud. Chris, I said, come through if you like. The girls would be pleased to see you. He looked up, slightly surprised. I don't usually invite him to join my friends. Then he smiled. I might pop in for a minute. I'd like that, I said. Sarah looked at me. I smiled at her. She smiled back. I took the tray and set the biscuits to cool. Margaret arrived first, 3:45. That's unusual. She normally arrives exactly at 1:30. She's precise about time. 1:45 means she wanted to talk before the others. I poured her tea. She took off her coat, hung it up, sat down. I called Florence, she said. She knows. Paula, too. Good. Dorothy, I want to clarify one thing. Go ahead. Margaret folded her hands on the table. We're not destroying him. Of course not. We're simply interested. Genuinely interested. Very genuinely, said Margaret. With respect for his profession. Naturally. Margaret took a biscuit, bit into it, looked towards the living room where the scratching post stood. Dorothy, she said. Yes? You don't have a cat? No. But there's a scratching post. There is. Margaret finished her biscuit, said something quietly. I caught the word ridiculous. I didn't ask who she meant. It was clear enough. At 4:00, Florence arrived. At 20 past, Paula, notebook under her arm and pen in her pocket. We sat down, dealt the cards, poured tea. At 4:30, the coffee machine hummed in the kitchen. He came out at 4:35. Coffee mug, one earbud in, the other dangling. Blue jumper, the one Sarah bought him for his birthday. He looked relaxed, amiable, like a man who stops in for a minute out of politeness. Oh, he said from the doorway, everyone's here. Good evening. Good evening, Christopher, said Margaret. Do sit down, Chris, I said. Have a biscuit. He took a chair from the wall, set it beside the table, sat, took a biscuit, bit into it, looked at the cards. What are you playing? Bridge, said Florence. Right. He nodded. Glanced at the scratching post in the corner, then at the window. He was clearly planning to stay 5 minutes and leave. Margaret played a card, then raised her eyes to Christopher, unhurriedly, as if she'd only just remembered he was there. Christopher, she said, your mother was telling us last week about narrative models in economic analysis. Robert Shiller, Narrative Economics. As a financial analyst, do you apply anything similar in your work? Christopher blinked. He clearly hadn't expected a question, especially that one. Well, broadly speaking, Yes, he said. It's an interesting concept, but in practical analysis, things work a little differently. Tell us how, said Margaret. Christopher put down his mug, sat up slightly. Well, in financial analysis, we work with data. The numbers speak for themselves. Narrative is more for a general audience. I see, said Margaret. And how do you distinguish between when the numbers speak for themselves and when narrative is shaping how the numbers are perceived? Those are different situations, aren't they? Well, that depends on context, said Christopher. Florence played a card without looking up. Christopher, what do you think about cognitive bias in long-term forecasting? I worked with auditors for 30 years. They always said it was the central problem in reporting. Christopher shifted his gaze to Florence, then back to Margaret. Something in his face changed slightly, as if he'd only just begun to understand that there would be more than one question. It's a serious topic, he said. Exactly, Florence nodded. That's precisely why it's interesting. I looked at my cards, drank my tea, offered more biscuits once. Paula opened her notebook, took up her pen, looked at Christopher with the expression of a scientist who has encountered a new species. And how do you work with narrative bias in forecasting models? Dorothy was explaining it to us through the unreliable narrator in Nabokov as a literary analytical tool. I'd be very interested to hear the financial perspective. Christopher put down his mug. Christopher picked it up again. Christopher put it down again. These are rather different fields, he said. Of course, agreed Paula. That's precisely why it's interesting to compare. She poised her pen over the notebook. I touched the pocket of my cardigan lightly. The index cards were there. I didn't take them out. There was no need. Everything was going on its own. The next 40 minutes I will remember for a long time. Margaret asked about rhetorical structures in financial presentations. You surely use persuasion as well as numbers, don't you? And Christopher agreed, then qualified, then got tangled in his own qualifications. The interesting thing about watching someone try to be authoritative on a subject they only half know is that they keep reaching for the vocabulary without the substance. Words like framework and context-driven and nuanced approach. Margaret received each with a nod of precisely calibrated encouragement that conveyed neither agreement nor disagreement, only interest. The interest of a woman who has cross-examined people for 30 years. So when the numbers are, as you say, context-driven, who determines the context? Well, the analyst does, within the model. And who determines the model? The team, the methodology. I see. And who determines the methodology? Christopher had the expression of a man who had started walking down a corridor and gradually realized it had no exit. It's more of an iterative process, he said. Of course, said Margaret. I understand completely. She played a card. From her expression, you would have thought they'd been discussing the weather. Florence asked about managing large teams. How many people in your group? And when he said 6, nodded with the air of someone for whom this explains a great deal. And when there's a disagreement about interpretation, how do you resolve it? We look at the data. And if the data is ambiguous, then we discuss it. Who has the final word? I do, usually. Florence considered this. In my experience, the most difficult thing isn't the decision itself. It's making the decision in a way that everyone can live with. Do you find that? Christopher opened his mouth, closed it. Yes, that's a real challenge. Indeed. Florence played her card. Your mother used to say that the most important thing in a seminar was not the answer you gave, but the quality of the silence before it. That the silence was where the actual thinking happened. Christopher looked at me. I was looking at my cards. Paula asked about methodology and wrote down his answers with the expression of a scientist recording the behavior of a new species. Not unkind, simply precise. She asked about narrative bias in forecasting models, about the difference between quantitative and qualitative uncertainty, about how you communicate risk to a client who doesn't want to hear it. Your mother taught a module on unreliable narrators, Paula mentioned. The idea that the person telling the story shapes the story in ways they're not fully aware of. Does that come up in financial analysis? In a general sense, said Christopher, more carefully now. In what specific sense? Well, you have to be aware of your own assumptions. Can you always be? You try to be. Paula wrote something down. What do you do when you can't? You get a second opinion, Christopher said finally. Yes, said Paula. That's exactly right. I poured tea, played cards, offered more biscuits once. Somewhere around the 25th minute, Margaret asked about in medias res, beginning a narrative in the middle of the action, a literary term. Your analytical reports often open that way, straight to the point? Christopher looked at her. That's more a question for Mom, he said. Margaret turned to me slowly. I looked up from my cards. Yes, I said. In medias res, said Margaret. Beginning in the middle of the action, I said. Horace, ars poetica. Used when exposition would kill the pace. Followed by analepsis, retrospective filling of context. Exactly, said Margaret. She turned back to Christopher. You see? Very useful tool. Christopher looked at me. I looked at my cards. Florence played an ace. At the 38th minute, Margaret asked about Dear Reader, the narrative device of addressing the audience directly. Does that work in financial reports or only in literary fiction? Christopher opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Honestly, he said, that's better put to Mom. To Mom? Margaret repeated. She's the specialist, he said. The specialist, Margaret agreed. Yes. Your mother lectured on narrative structure for 32 years, said Margaret. Nabokov, Austen, Forster. 3 books, 7 articles in peer-reviewed journals. Did you know that? Christopher looked at her. Yes, I knew she taught. She taught, agreed Margaret. Indeed. The silence in the room thickened. Florence looked at her cards. Paula was writing in her notebook. I looked at mine and thought about how Tom would be sitting in a corner right now, laughing soundlessly. Well then, I said. I looked up at Christopher. He was looking at me. The smile was gone, the condescending, well-meaning one. Something else was there instead. Since you enjoy correcting people in public, Chris, it's been nice to discuss something you know rather less about. Silence. Christopher opened his mouth, closed it. Christ, he said. Not to us, to himself. One word. Margaret nodded. Once. The way a jury delivers its verdict. More tea? I offered. Sarah came in 10 minutes later. She'd been looking for Christopher, apparently surprised he'd been gone so long. She stood in the doorway, saw his face, looked at us, at Paula's notebook. Is everything all right? She asked carefully. Wonderful, I said. Sit down, Sarah. Have some tea. Sarah looked at Christopher. Christopher stood up. I need to, he started. Didn't finish. Took his mug, put it down, picked it up again. I need to make a call. He left. Sarah remained in the doorway. She had that look people get when they've walked into a room and the atmosphere tells them something happened that they don't fully understand yet. Do sit down, dear, said Florence. Do you play bridge? I never have. We'll teach you, said Paula. She turned to a fresh page in her notebook, wrote the date at the top with the focused air of someone beginning a proper record. Sarah glanced after Christopher, then came in and sat down, took a biscuit. Try a hand, said Florence. Just see what it feels like. Sarah tried. She played cautiously, looking at each card for a long moment before putting it down. But she didn't apologize for every move, which I liked. Good, said Margaret, after one particular play. That was the right choice. Sarah looked slightly surprised. Was it? You protected your partner's lead, said Margaret. That's the whole game, in essence. Sarah looked at the cards for a moment, working this out. Dorothy, she said. Yes? This, she stopped, looked at the scratching post in the corner, then at me. This should have happened a long time ago. I looked at her. She wasn't smiling, not with that quiet smile of approval I'd seen 4 Tuesdays running. She was looking straight at me. Perhaps, I said. Margaret dealt the cards. Christopher came back 20 minutes later, without the mug, without the earbud, stood in the doorway, looked at Sarah at the card table, then at me. Mom, he said, can we talk? After bridge, I said. Sit down if you like. He stood for a moment, then brought his chair, sat, didn't take any cards, just sat. We played. Margaret explained the rules to Sarah, patiently, in a manner she presumably never used in the courtroom. Florence drank her tea. Paula was writing something in her notebook. Christopher sat in silence for 20 minutes, then said, I didn't know it was 4 times. I played a card. Now you do. I didn't think it was... He stopped. I thought I was keeping you from making mistakes in front of people, that I was being helpful. I know, I said. Margaret played a card without looking up. That's the most unfortunate thing about situations like this, she said, when a person thinks they're being helpful. I was wrong, said Christopher. He said it without a smile, without softening, just like that. I looked at him, at the blue jumper, at his face without an earbud. He looked slightly younger than usual, or simply different, as if he'd taken something off along with the earbud. I heard you, I said. Nabokov, he said. You're right about the quote. I checked the wrong source. I know, I said. Check letters to Vera. There's a letter from 1951. He nodded, slowly, like someone committing something to memory. Florence played an ace, took the trick, looked at Christopher over her cards, long, attentive, with the gaze of a school principal deciding what to do with a pupil. Young man, she said, your mother had 3 cohorts of students a year, the largest 260 people. Any one of them could ask her a question she wasn't prepared for. She was always prepared. Christopher looked at me. I looked at my cards. More tea? I offered. They left at 8. Margaret was the last to go, as always. She put on her coat in the hallway, slowly, button by button. Dorothy? Margaret? Good evening. I'm glad. She picked up her gloves, looked towards the stairs. Voices were coming from there, Christopher and Sarah talking about something upstairs. He isn't bad, said Margaret. I know, I said. Just young. 39, I said. Margaret smiled slightly. By my measure, young. She did up the last button, picked up her bag. Florence said Sarah played well for a first time. Yes, she has good instincts. Paula recorded her result in the notebook, Margaret reported, for future reference. Paula records everything for future reference. Margaret nodded, opened the door, turned back on the threshold. Next Tuesday, as usual? As usual, I said. She left. I closed the door. The house was quiet. From the kitchen came the faint smell of biscuits, just a little still. The cups stood on the table. The scratching post in the corner was empty. There was still no cat, and I thought there wouldn't be one. It had somehow resolved itself. I gathered the cups, carried them to the kitchen, put the kettle on. Christopher came to the kitchen at 8:30. I was washing up. He sat on the stool at the kitchen counter, the spot where Tom always had his morning coffee, folded his hands on the worktop. He had the particular stillness of a person who has been thinking in another room and has arrived with something prepared. Mom? Yes? I want to apologize properly, not the way I did before. I turned off the tap, took the tea towel, turned around. He was looking straight at me. No smile, not the condescending one, not the guilty one, just looking. In the kitchen light, he looked younger than he'd looked all evening. Or perhaps just more uncertain, which amounts to the same thing. I didn't realize how it looked. That it was that many times. 4, I said. 4. He nodded. I thought that I was stopping you from making mistakes in front of people, that it was care. I hung up the tea towel. I thought about how to say what I wanted to say without it sounding like a verdict. Verdicts close things. I didn't want to close this. Chris, I said, for 35 years your father never once corrected me, not once, in public, even when I was wrong. Christopher said nothing. Do you know what he did instead? What? He told me afterwards, at home, just the two of us. I took a cup and put it in the rack. He'd say, Dot, I looked it up. The date was actually such and such. And then he'd make another cup of tea, and that was the end of it. I put another cup in the rack. That's called respect, not agreement. Respect. Christopher looked at the worktop. He was better at that than I am, he said finally. Yes, I said, he was. A silence that wasn't uncomfortable. The kettle had finished and gone quiet. Outside, the wind moved something in the garden, a branch or the gate. I understand, he said. Good, Mom. Yes? The armchair, he said. Your old armchair. I gave it to the neighbors, the Watkinses. Bill wanted it for the garage. It's probably still there. I looked at him. I can get it back, he said, if you want. I thought for a moment. Tomorrow, I said, first thing. He nodded, stood, paused by the door. Good night, Mom. Good night, Chris. He left. I stood in the kitchen a while longer, looked out the window, dark, a street lamp, wind moving the branches. November. I thought about Tom, about how he'd be sitting on his stool right now with a coffee, saying something quiet and exact. He had a habit of finding the one word that explained everything. He called it the right peg, the word that everything else hangs from. I thought that tomorrow the armchair would come back, and that Tuesdays would be right again. 3 weeks later, they found a flat. Sarah told me over breakfast, carefully, as if afraid I'd be upset. Dorothy, we found one. City center, good area. We move on Friday. Good, I said. You won't, she paused. You won't miss us? I looked at her. She was sitting with her mug across from me, sitting slightly straighter than usual, serious. I'll miss you, I said. You play a very decent bridge for a first time. Sarah smiled, not the quiet smile of approval, a different one, a real one. Paula wrote down my result. She writes everything down, I said. It's her way of saying a person matters. Sarah looked into her mug. Dorothy, I saw it. 4 times. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. I said nothing. That was wrong. Yes, I said. I'm glad you did what you did. I picked up my mug. We simply asked questions. Very good questions, said Sarah. We drank our tea. Outside it was December, first snow, light, almost not real. Christopher was still asleep. The scratching post stood in the corner to be taken with the rest of their things. The armchair had come back on Friday. Bill Watkins had carried it across himself, apologizing that it had been in the garage, brushing something off the seat. It stood now in its place by the study window, a little faded, one armrest still worn. Tom bought it because it was soft. He was right. I sat in it for a while that same Friday evening with a book I wasn't really reading. The light through the window was the particular gray gold of a winter afternoon. The house was beginning to sound like itself again. The specific acoustic of a space that belongs to one person that hasn't been adjusted for others. I thought, I should have done something sooner. I also thought, I did it at exactly the right time. Both of these were probably true. Margaret called on Sunday. Have they gone? Friday, I said. How's the house? Quiet, good. Paula has entered it in the record, said Margaret, that on that Wednesday, Christopher answered 1 question in 7 correctly. Which one? Narrative economics generally, conceptually. Fair enough, I said. Florence says he's young. You said so too. I still say so, said Margaret. But young doesn't mean you can correct your mother in public. No, I agreed. It doesn't. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Dorothy, next Tuesday, bring the ginger biscuits, Florence asked. I will. And Paula wants to finish the game with Sarah. Says she recorded 2 interesting plays of hers. I looked out the window. Snow was falling harder now. Proper December snow. Sarah might come, I said. I need to ask her. Ask her, said Margaret. She has good instincts, Paula said so, and Paula doesn't say things for nothing. She doesn't, I agreed. Until Tuesday, Dorothy. Until Tuesday, Margaret. I put down the phone, looked at the armchair. It stood by the window, a little faded, one armrest worn, snow beyond the glass, a quiet house. I thought about the way Margaret had said, Paula doesn't say things for nothing. That's a form of endorsement coming from Margaret. High praise, actually. I'll call Sarah tomorrow. Ask about Tuesday. I think she'll come.